Now, that is not quibbling about misunderstanding. That is a clear statement from an orthodox text making clear that there were forgeries at that stage. So we're not into a conspiracy here. What we are into is the creation of a myth which has been perpetuated through generations. Now, if we want to look at Tacitus in more detail, let's do so, because I'm happy to do that, because I think here is an example of a very famous paragraph in Tacitus, which Christians use an awful lot, but in actual fact has great question marks hanging over it.
Okay, give us this passage and why you doubt it then.
Well, as JP will know, he's referring to something that appears in the Annals of Tacitus. I think it's in book 15, where he basically talks about Nero fastening the guilt of the fire that had affected Rome on the Christians. Now, it's a very lurid and well-written couple of paragraphs about and everyone is familiar with this very, memorable scene of the torched Christians decorating Tacitus' garden, so-called. But I find that questionable simply because if we look back to the other history of Tacitus, written earlier, that is the histories, in Book 5, where he actually discusses the Jews particularly, he makes no mention of the Christians. He makes no mention of this notorious torching of Christians by Nero in his garden. So we can go through it phrase by phrase if we felt it was necessary, but I think it's salutary to note that this primary witness for the historical Jesus is a passage in a book to which we are indebted to Christians who are known to make forgeries, and we can see evidence there immediately how it looks very questionable. Now,
it looks like it's been inserted.
It looks like it's been inserted, yes.
So it wasn't there to start with. JP?
Okay. This is, again, simply this guilt by association technique, and he's saying conspiracy. Well, if you're saying that some Christian doing a forgery in, i.e., the 3rd century, is evidence that some Christian might have done a forgery in, i.e., the 9th century, then conspiracy is really the only way to establish a connection. It's as though saying there's some cooperative effort by Christians to produce forgeries over an extended period of time. This guilt by association argument will not work.
JP, it's a commitment to
the
faith.
No, I will not allow you to interrupt me, Ken. You will let me finish. Now, this guilt by association argument will not work. It can be turned around just as readily by the Shakespeare people, who say, the anti-Stratfordians as they call them, who say that Shakespeare did not write his works. It can be used to say that Gamaliel did not exist and passages by him were inserted. We can find some Jews who did something wrong in the 13th century and say, well, this proves or helps support the idea that this was inserted into the Talmud. Now, as far as this thing not being mentioned in the histories but being mentioned in the annals, I have a very simple question. Is everything that is written in the histories also mentioned in the annals?
Ken?
I can interrupt here, can I?
I'm done now. You may go ahead.
No, of course not. No, of course not.
All right, that's all. Now I will let you go ahead after I say this. Since that is the case, then there is no justification for saying, because this does not appear in the histories, we can suspect that it was inserted into the annals. Unless the annals and the histories are exact parallels for one another, this argument has no basis whatsoever. And now I'm done.
Okay, well, I would say that whilst we wouldn't expect both sources to replicate entirely the same material, in certain areas it would be reasonable to expect some support for such ideas. I mean, this episode that is found in Tacitus regarding the fire isn't found anywhere else. It isn't found in Suetonius or any other writer. It isn't found in Josephus. We have this very lurid story, and it isn't found in Tacitus' other references to the Jewish people, and that is why question marks are raised in no small order over this evidence.
It sounds to me, JP, like this just isn't good enough evidence that there was insertion, that there was change. It's all guilt by association because other people did it. It must have happened here.
Yeah, well, all he's done here is say, well, now it doesn't appear in Suetonius and Josephus. And my question is the same. Is everything in Suetonius also in Tacitus's works? Is everything in Josephus? I mean, this is an argument simply contrived. It's like it must be mentioned in every single place, but I don't see any reason to believe that at all. We're simply standing back with a gasp and saying, oh my, it's not mentioned there.
Yep.
This is not significant at all.
The difficulty we have with that, of course, is all these various sources, which, as you say, we shouldn't expect them to replicate each other across the whole field. But what's striking about them all is the absence of references to the historical Jesus. I mean, that is the issue at stake here.
Isn't the problem, though, that if you're demanding this weight of evidence, you're asking that you can't trust any history from the first few centuries that that Christians could have had access to? I mean, is that the problem? Aren't you asking a bit much there?
Well, no. To say that we can't trust it would be going too far. But we have to view it with a certain amount of care and caution, particularly where it relates to matters that are so crucial to the faith. Because what these, and I'm sure we could go on to the other half a dozen people that are usually bracketed together, these non-Christian witnesses, is that all those passages are both brief but very powerful. They have the character of looking like an insertion, because so much is said that's so useful to the Christians, and yet all within one paragraph that is neatly slotted into usually a very different topic, and that is where I think we all should be cautioned.
I mean, are you saying that these people should have been writing whole books about Jesus if he was such an important character?
Well, let's take the easiest example there of Josephus. Why does Josephus say so much about the Christians in one paragraph, and yet the rest of his book he says nothing about them? I mean, that smacks of an insertion.
JP.
All right, well, I'm not going to deal with Josephus. In fact, someone else wrote my chapter on Josephus for the book I put out. So I'm just going to deal with Tacitus, and let me just ask a yes or no question. Does that brief and powerful description also fit with the idea of Tacitus, in your opinion? Are you going with that as a reason to suppose it's an insertion there?
Are you asking? Do I think the language has the right character for Tacitus?
Yes, and the way.
I think it does. I think someone who has done that has done it very skillfully.
All right, so this is the clever forger thesis, essentially.
Well, some of them would have been clever forgers, would they not?
And how is this disprovable?
Well, I think that's your task, not mine.
Oh, no, you have to tell me, you have to have disproof available or some possible option for disproof, because otherwise we can simply say the same for the passages in the Talmud about Gamaliel.
Well, I defer to your knowledge of those particular passages. I haven't looked at those myself.
All right.
Okay, but when we read any document from the past, we obviously recognize certain possible problems with it, in the sense that the author may have a point of view that he's expressing. He may be trying to please political forces that are his audience. There may be all kinds of considerations. Now, the probability about this lurid passage in Tacitus, I would say the probability is that it is forged. Now, we can't say more than that, and yet, are we going to build our entire religious faith on the questionable reliability of an insertion in a Roman historian's
Just
book?
one more response from you, JP, and then we're going to have to go to a break.
All right, well, religious faith, again, is a separate issue from whether or not a man named Jesus existed and headed the Christian movement. We can work on that later. The only reason I have heard so far that this passage might be a forgery is, A, that it is brief and powerful, which makes me wonder whether other passages in Tacitus are likewise brief and powerful, and otherwise they might be insertions. And second, the item we alluded to about the spelling of the word Christians. And that's all I've heard so far. Now, perhaps we'll have some more reasons given after the break. I have at least 19 or 20 items that Dennis McKinsey once reported supposedly giving reasons why this was a forgery. I'll be interested to see if any of these are picked up.